I still remember the exact moment my mother-in-law smiled at me and said, "You were never meant to be part of this family." She said it in front of the entire boardroom. 20 executives. My husband sitting silently beside her. And my name already printed on the termination papers. At that moment, I thought losing my job was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong. Because 30 minutes later, a man walked into that room holding a DNA envelope. And everything my mother-in-law spent 30 years hiding came crashing down. By the end of that day, someone was arrested, someone lost the company, and my husband discovered the woman he called Mom had lied to him his entire life. But to understand how it all happened, you need to know what kind of family the Harringtons really were. When people looked at the Harrington family, they saw perfection. Money. Power. Luxury. They owned Harrington Jewelers, one of the biggest luxury jewelry companies in the country. Their stores were everywhere: New York, Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles. Their commercials played during award shows. Celebrities wore their diamonds. Business magazines called them America's Royal Jewelry Family. And at the center of it all was my mother-in-law, Victoria Harrington. Elegant. Cold. Calculating. She had the kind of smile that looked warm in photographs but terrifying in real life. The first time I met her, she hugged me and whispered, "You're pretty. That helps." I should have run that day. But I loved her son, Ethan Harrington. He was nothing like his mother. Kind. Quiet. Brilliant. We met when I was working as a junior marketing assistant for a small fashion brand. He came in wearing jeans and sneakers, pretending to be normal. I had no idea he was rich. We spent 6 months eating cheap takeout and watching movies before I even learned his last name. And when I did, I laughed. "You're joking." He smiled nervously. "I wanted you to know me first." And I did. I fell deeply in love with him. 3 years later, we got married. That's when Victoria started hating me openly. At first, she hid it behind fake politeness. Little comments. "Oh, your family is modest. How adorable that you used to shop during sales. You're surprisingly well-spoken." But after the wedding, she stopped pretending. Especially when Ethan convinced the board to hire me into the company's branding department. Victoria exploded. "She has no Harrington blood," she snapped during dinner. Ethan calmly replied, "She's my wife." Victoria stared directly at me. "That doesn't make her family." The room went silent. Even Ethan's father avoided eye contact. That was the first moment I realized something important. Nobody challenged Victoria Harrington. Nobody. Not employees. Not executives. Not even her own husband. Still, I worked hard. Harder than anyone else. I stayed late. Skipped vacations. Handled campaigns others failed. And within 2 years, our online sales doubled. Magazines praised our rebranding strategy. Investors loved me. Employees respected me. Victoria hated that most of all. Because no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make me fail. One evening, I walked into the executive lounge and heard Victoria speaking to 2 board members. "She's manipulating Ethan. She's turning him against the family. We need her out before she takes control." I froze outside the door. One of the men asked carefully, "But sales are up 40% because of her campaigns." Victoria's voice turned icy. "I don't care if she doubles profits. She is not one of us." I quietly walked away before they saw me. That night, I asked Ethan, "Does your mother want me fired?" He sighed heavily. "She thinks the company should stay pure family." I laughed bitterly. "Pure?" Ethan rubbed his forehead. "You know how she is." No. I didn't. Not yet. Because a few weeks later, things got worse. Much worse. It started with missing files. Then disappeared contracts. Then suddenly, financial discrepancies appeared under my department. Thousands of dollars. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Until the company accountant avoided looking at me. And Victoria started acting strangely calm. One morning, security stopped me at the entrance. "Ma'am, we need to check your office." My stomach dropped. Inside my drawer, they found confidential company documents and unauthorized payment approvals. Documents I had never seen before. Victoria stood behind security with crossed arms. Disappointed. Almost pleased. "This is very serious, Claire." I looked at Ethan desperately. "You know I didn't do this." He looked shaken. I know. But Victoria interrupted. "Knowing and proving are different things." That sentence changed everything. Because suddenly, people started whispering. Executives stopped smiling at me. Employees avoided eye contact. And Victoria watched it all happen like a queen observing an execution. 3 days later, I was called into an emergency board meeting. I walked into the massive glass conference room feeling sick. Everyone was there. Lawyers. executives, investors. Victoria sat at the head of the table wearing white. Like she was attending a celebration. She slid a folder toward me. Inside were termination papers. Accusations of fraud. Breach of trust. Corporate misconduct. My hands shook. This is insane. Victoria folded her hands calmly. The board has voted. I looked around the room. Nobody met my eyes. Then I looked at Ethan. He looked devastated. But silent. That hurt worse than anything. Victoria smiled slightly. You were never qualified for this world, Claire. Then she leaned closer. You should have stayed where you belonged. I felt my chest tighten. Everything I built, gone. Everything. Then suddenly, the boardroom doors opened. And an older man walked inside carrying a sealed envelope. Victoria's face changed instantly. For the first time since I met her, she looked afraid. Sorry I'm late, the man said calmly. Everyone turned. Victoria stood up immediately. You weren't invited. The man ignored her and handed a folder directly to Ethan. You deserve the truth. Ethan frowned. What is this? The man looked at Victoria. A DNA test. The entire room went silent. Victoria's voice cracked sharply. Don't you dare. But Ethan had already opened the envelope. I watched the color drain from his face. His hands trembled. What? He looked up slowly. This says Dad isn't my biological father. Gasps filled the room. One executive literally whispered. Oh my God. Victoria stood frozen. Ethan looked destroyed. Then the older man spoke again. Because I am. The room exploded into chaos. The man introduced himself as Daniel Mercer. A former jewelry designer. One of Harrington Jewelers' original founders. 32 years earlier, Victoria had an affair with him. When she got pregnant, she hid it. Then married Charles Harrington for money and status. Daniel tried contacting her for years. She paid him to disappear. And when Ethan turned 21, Daniel secretly requested a DNA test through legal channels connected to inheritance documents. Victoria spent years blocking the results. Until now. Ethan looked physically sick. You lied to me my whole life? Victoria's voice shook. I did what I had to do. Daniel laughed bitterly. No. You did what protected your reputation. Then he turned toward the board. There's more. And somehow, it got even worse. Daniel revealed something nobody expected. Before Harrington Jewelers became famous, he and Charles Harrington founded the business together. 50-50 partners. But after Victoria married Charles, legal documents mysteriously changed. Daniel lost everything. Or so everyone thought. Daniel smiled coldly. I kept copies. He placed old contracts onto the table. Original ownership agreements. Signatures. Financial transfers. The company lawyers immediately started reviewing them. One attorney looked horrified. These documents are authentic. Victoria slammed her hand onto the table. No. But the lawyer continued. If this is legitimate, then Daniel Mercer owns nearly 40% of the company. The room erupted again. Victoria looked like she might faint. And then Daniel said the sentence that destroyed her completely. I also know who framed Claire. Silence. Absolute silence. My heart stopped. Victoria slowly turned toward him. And for the first time, I saw panic. Real panic. Daniel handed another file to the company attorneys. Security footage. Bank transfers. Internal emails. Evidence proving someone used company accounts to plant fake financial records under my name. The emails traced back to Victoria's personal assistant, who immediately burst into tears. I'm sorry. She told me to do it. The entire room stared at Victoria. The assistant sobbed uncontrollably. She said Claire was destroying the family. She said we had to remove her before Ethan gave her control. Victoria whispered. Stop talking. But it was over. The board members looked horrified. One executive muttered. This is criminal. Ethan stood up slowly. His eyes filled with betrayal. You framed my wife? Victoria's voice cracked. I did it for you. No, Ethan said quietly. You did it for yourself. That sentence shattered her. But the nightmare wasn't finished yet. Because Charles Harrington finally spoke. And what he revealed changed everything again. Charles had been silent the entire meeting. Broken. Exhausted. Then suddenly he stood. I knew. Everyone turned. Victoria stared at him in shock. Charles looked at Ethan sadly. I knew you weren't my biological son. Ethan looked destroyed. You knew, my whole life? Charles nodded slowly. But I loved you anyway. Even I started crying. Charles continued. I stayed silent because I loved this family, and because I was weak. Then he looked directly at Victoria. But what you did to Claire crossed every line. Victoria's mask finally cracked. You think you were innocent? She screamed. The room froze. And suddenly decades of secrets began exploding out all at once. Victoria started shouting uncontrollably. About money. Power. Reputation. She admitted manipulating board members for years. Destroying competitors. Bribing journalists. Threatening employees. The elegant billionaire mask disappeared completely. Underneath was someone terrified of losing control. Ethan stared at her like he didn't recognize her. Neither did anyone else. Finally, Victoria pointed directly at me. This all started because of her. I whispered. What did I ever do to you? Victoria's eyes filled with hatred. You made Ethan choose someone else. And suddenly, I understood. It was never about business. Never about money. Victoria couldn't handle losing control over her son. I wasn't her enemy because I was poor. I was her enemy because Ethan loved me more than he obeyed her. And that realization made everything even sadder. 1 hour later, corporate investigators arrived with police officers. The board had already suspended Victoria from all company authority. Employees watched in shock as officers entered the executive floor. Victoria stood tall at first. Defiant. But when the lead investigator mentioned fraud charges, her confidence disappeared. She looked at Ethan desperately. Please say something. Ethan's voice was hollow. You destroyed our family. The officers escorted her toward the elevator. And before the doors closed, she looked directly at me. Pure hatred. But also fear. Then she disappeared. And just like that, the most powerful woman in the company was gone. The following weeks were chaos. News channels exploded with headlines. Luxury jewelry empire scandal. CEO accused of fraud and corporate conspiracy. Stock prices crashed. Reporters camped outside the company. But inside the storm, something unexpected happened. The employees supported me. People I barely knew came to my office saying, we always knew something was wrong. You didn't deserve this. I'm sorry we stayed silent. And Ethan? He completely fell apart. One night I found him sitting alone in our kitchen at 3 a.m. Just staring into space. I don't know who I am anymore, he whispered. I sat beside him quietly. My whole life was built on lies. I held his hand. You're still you. But healing wasn't easy. Because betrayal from strangers hurts. Betrayal from family destroys you differently. A month later, Daniel invited us to dinner. Ethan was nervous. He barely knew the man. Imagine discovering your biological father at 32 years old. Over dinner, Daniel told stories about Ethan as a baby. How he secretly watched school events from afar. How Victoria threatened lawsuits if he came close. Ethan listened silently. Then finally asked, why come back now? Daniel looked at me. Because when I heard what Victoria was doing to Claire, I realized she hadn't changed at all. Then he looked at Ethan. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. For the first time, I saw hope in Ethan's eyes. Small, fragile, but real. 6 months later, the company held its annual shareholder gala. The same ballroom where Victoria once ruled like a queen. This time, she wasn't invited. The board officially announced major leadership changes. Charles retired. Daniel regained ownership shares. And Ethan became the new CEO. Then unexpectedly, Ethan walked onto the stage and held out his hand toward me. None of this company would still exist without Claire. The room applauded. My eyes filled with tears. Ethan smiled softly. She didn't just save this business. She saved me. And then came the final moment. The board announced a new ethics foundation in the company's name. Led by me. The same woman Victoria once called unworthy. The same woman she tried to destroy. Now standing at the center of everything she lost. But the real victory wasn't money. Or power. It was this. Victoria spent her entire life controlling people through fear. And in the end, the truth destroyed her. Sometimes the people who smile the brightest hide the darkest secrets. Sometimes family isn't about blood. And sometimes the person others try hardest to destroy becomes the reason their empire survives. If there's one thing I learned from the Harrington family, it's this. Lies can build power for a while. But eventually, truth walks into the room carrying an envelope. And when it does, everything changes.